All right, so welcome. We're here for about 15 minutes of yoga, and you're welcome to stay for the entire 15 minutes or a part of it. And you're welcome to find a chair or some kind of seat, usually a hard bottom chair, or at least hard enough is a good idea. So that can be something you find. And if you'd like, you might start to notice your breath. So you might notice your breath, maybe lengthening your spine as you breathe. So you could be lengthening your spine. So you might be lengthening your spine. Maybe noticing the pacing of your breath. So you might notice, like, are your inhales and exhales similar in length? Or are they different? And you could, if you'd like, you could let your breath be as it is, like just breathe in your natural breath. Another option might be to shift the breath into more even breathing. So maybe you're inhaling and exhaling for the same length of time. So that maybe you're counting in for 4. And as you exhale, you might count 4. You can pick a different number. You can count as quickly or as slowly as you like. Perhaps evening the inhales and the exhales as you breathe. Another option is to notice your natural breath as it is. As you're breathing, you might notice a slight pause between your inhales and exhales. Perhaps noticing that moment between your body shifting from inhale to exhale and exhale to inhale. You're welcome to take a couple more breaths. And maybe if you like, you might turn your head to one side. So you might be turning your head to one side, maybe turning it part of the way, or you could turn it as far as you can. You have a choice. Maybe noticing your breath. And if your head is turned to one side, you might bring it back to center and maybe switching sides. So you might be turning your head to one side. You could turn it part of the way, or you could turn it as far as you can. You have a choice. And if your head is turned to the side, you might bring it back to center and maybe tilting your head to one side. So you could tilt your head to one side so that maybe your ear is moving in the direction of your shoulder. So you might be tilting your head to one side. Maybe noticing your breath. If your head is tilted to one side, you might bring it back to center and maybe tilting it the other way. So you might be tilting your head to one side. Perhaps noticing your breath, or maybe noticing some sensation in the sides of your neck. If your head is tilted to one side, you might bring it back to center and maybe moving your shoulders. So one way to move your shoulders might be to roll them. So you could roll them forward or you could roll them back. You could lift and lower your shoulders. You have a choice. And if you've been moving your shoulders, you might bring them back to center and maybe reaching one arm up to the sky. So you might lift one arm up to the sky and maybe staying here. Another option could be to lean to the other side. So you might have one arm lifted. You might be leaning in the other direction of that arm. Maybe placing your bottom arm on the chair or your leg. And you're welcome to notice your breath. And if you're leaning to the side, you might lift back up to center. And if your arm is lifted, you could lower your arm. And perhaps switching sides. So you might lift one arm up overhead. So you might have your arm lifted and you could stay here. Another option might be to lean to the other side. So you might be leaning to one side. Maybe noticing sensation in the sides of your body. You might notice it somewhere else. Or maybe not at all. And if you're leaning to the side, you might lift back up to center. And if your arm is lifted, you might lower your arm. And perhaps placing your hands on your legs. As you're inhaling, you might move your belly forward, maybe lifting your chest, perhaps lifting your chin. And then as you exhale, you might round your spine, maybe lowering your chin to your chest. You're welcome to do that again. Maybe inhaling, you might move your belly forward, maybe moving your chest forward and up, perhaps lifting your chin. And maybe as you exhale, you might round your spine, maybe lowering your chin to your chest. And you're welcome to do that a couple of more times, maybe with your own breath. Maybe noticing how your breath moves as you move with it. And perhaps returning back to center. So you might be seated, perhaps lengthening your spine to the sky, and maybe extending one leg out in front of you. So you might extend one leg out in front of you, perhaps placing your heel on the floor, maybe straightening that leg. And you could stay here, perhaps lifting your spine towards the sky. Another option could be to hinge at your hips and maybe folding forward. And so you might place your forearms on your legs. Another option could be to place your hands on the floor. You have a choice. Maybe noticing the breath. And if you're folded forward, you might lift back up. If your leg is extended, you might bring your leg back and perhaps switching sides. So you might extend your other leg out in front of you, maybe lengthening your spine to the sky. And you could stay here. Another option could be to hinge at your hips, maybe folding forward. So you might place your hands or forearms on your legs or your hands on the floor. You have a choice. Maybe noticing the breath. You might notice sensation in the back of your extended leg. You might notice it somewhere else. Or maybe not at all. And if you're folded forward, you might lift back up, perhaps placing both feet on the floor. But if you'd like, you could cross one leg over the other. So you might cross one ankle over your other thigh, maybe your shin over your thigh, and perhaps opening your knee to the side. And one option might be to lengthen your spine to the sky, maybe staying here. You could also hinge at your hips and maybe fold forward. So you might be folding forward, you might be lifted. You have a choice. Perhaps noticing your breath. If your leg is crossed over, you might release it, and you're welcome to switch sides. So you might cross your other leg over. So you might cross one ankle or shin over your other thigh. And maybe lengthening your spine to the sky. You might notice some sensation in your outer hip, or you might notice it somewhere else, or perhaps not at all. Maybe noticing the breath. And if your leg is crossed over, you might release it. And perhaps turning to your right. So you might lengthen your spine to the sky and maybe turn your torso to the right, perhaps placing your left hand on your right leg. And if you'd like, you could put your right hand behind you on the chair. So you might be turning to one side, maybe noticing sensation in maybe across the back of your shoulders or your neck. You might notice it somewhere else, or maybe not at all. If you're turned to the side, you might make your way back to center and perhaps changing sides. So you might turn your torso to the left. So you could be turning to the left. So you might be turning to one side, maybe noticing sensation across your back, maybe somewhere else, or perhaps not at all. And if your torso is turned to the side, you might make your way back to center. And perhaps placing your palms together in front of your heart. So you might bring your hands together at heart center. And maybe as you're inhaling, you might reach your arms up overhead, maybe separating your hands. And perhaps as you exhale, you might bring your arms down and around by your sides and back together in front of your heart. You're welcome to do that a few more times. Maybe inhaling, you might reach your arms overhead. And perhaps as you exhale, you might bring your arms down and around and back to heart center. Maybe inhaling, you might bring your arms up overhead. And perhaps exhaling, you might bring your arms down and around and by your sides back to center. And you're welcome to do that one more time. Maybe inhaling, reach up. Perhaps exhaling, bring your hands down and around by your sides and back to heart center. And maybe releasing your hands to your legs. You might hinge at your hips and fold. So you might place your forearms on your legs, or you could fold so that you place your hands on the floor. So you have a choice. You might have your hands on the floor, or you could have your forearms on your legs. Maybe noticing the breath. You might notice some sensation in your hips or back. You might notice it somewhere else, or maybe not at all. And if you're folded forward, you might lift back up. And perhaps finding a position to rest in. So you could stay seated, maybe lengthening your spine to the sky. Another option could be to lean back in your chair. So you could lean back in your chair. You have a choice. And we'll rest for about 30 more seconds. And I'll quiet my voice as we rest. You might notice your breath, maybe noticing movement in your belly or chest as you breathe, or maybe somewhere else. You're welcome to stay resting where you are longer. Or if you'd like, you might make your way back up to seated. Thank you so much for letting me guide our practice today. Peace.